We're about to get started in just a minute. It's already 10, but I'm going to give everyone, an appropriate amount of time to get to your chair, get your coffee, and we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes.
Dystopia that's located in Kansas City. So it's a fun little read. I think I might promote it just because it's fun.
When I get us started, is everyone settled enough? Good morning. You can still get your coffee and still get your donuts and get settled, but I'm going to have everyone try and be as quiet as possible so we can go ahead and get started and not take up too much of everyone's time. So I just wanted to thank you. This is actually our 10th year doing this. I was just a little baby librarian, and now I'm a full-grown librarian, and it's one of my favorite programs, so I'm really happy that we got to do it for as long as we have. And I am Ashley Fick. I always forget to introduce myself. I am the Civic Engagement Librarian for Johnson County Library. Welcome. And then quick housekeeping. So we're going to open with 3 minutes per legislator. This is their time to share what they think is most important with you, introduce themselves, all of that. You will submit your questions on cards. There's a card in every single chair. We've got pencils around. If you need a pencil, if you need a card, just raise your hand up. Catherine's back there. We've got some volunteers from the league. They'll be around to collect the questions and get them up to me. I ask the questions, one, that I can read. So it's important to write legibly. If I can't read it, I can't ask it. Also, try and write it in the form of a question. Sometimes we get statements. It's hard for us to know exactly what you're asking, so we can't address it if it's not a question. And then we preference the most commonly asked questions and questions with a wide audience. So if your question really just applies to you, it might be better to follow up with the legislator on an individual level. And we have follow-up sheets on all of your chairs, so you know how to get in contact with them. So no excuses. And I just want to end with a statement. I was trying to find a new statistic. I used this one last year, but I think it's perfect. 93% of Americans believe incivility is an issue. We don't agree on pretty much anything, but we agree on that. And the majority of Americans also agree that mutual respect is the path forward. So I would like this program to be an example of the path forward, please. So no shouting out, no clapping, and definitely no booing. But nobody here would boo. It has happened before, though. So we're going to be perfect, though. And with that, Senator Pettey, would you like to get started?
Certainly. So I'm Senator Pat Pettey. Oh, I've got a mic. I didn't even pick it up. I'm sorry. I'm Senator Pat Pettey. I represent the 6th District, which is a lot of Wyandotte County and a small portion of Johnson County. This is my 12th year. I'm finishing up my 3rd session, and I have filed for re-election. I serve on public health and welfare, education, and ways and means. And last week, I was sitting in on assessment and taxation for a week as well, which was very eye-opening. So I'm just going to touch on 3 things quickly. I know probably my colleagues will be touching on some of the same things. You're probably familiar with the governor's tax bill, and last week I had the opportunity to introduce that tax bill in assessment and taxation. It was very difficult to get it introduced, which shouldn't be the case, but sometimes some of my colleagues like to lay obstacles in the way of just introducing a bill, and that happened. Although that bill now is going to have a hearing, according to the chair, this next week, so we'll see if that does occur. But that bill does covers a lot of things. The governor has been very encompassing of, and the interesting thing is that so many of the the items that were with her tax bill are ones that the Republicans have supported along the way and alike, but because they're all bundled together and because they don't have a flat tax, now suddenly they're not as good. But there's the property tax exemption from the statewide school levy. There's the Social Security tax exemption, 100%. There's removal of the tax on groceries, including also diapers and feminine hygiene products that will begin April 1st instead of going all the way to January of 25. And then there's and then it includes also an annual sales tax holiday. Interestingly, we just talked about this annual sales tax holiday bill in assessment and taxation this week, another bill. They're both very similar, and so it seems, except the governor's does have caps, but very generous caps on just single items that could be purchased. There's also, I did also introduce the Cutting Health Care Costs for All Kansans Act, which is the Medicaid Expansion Act. And so thank you for all of you that are sending emails to all of us. My office has now received almost 800 emails, and although it is very cumbersome for my inbox, I would say keep it up. And so the House might talk about that there's a rumor that they're going to have a hearing. My chair in Public Health and Welfare has said she's not going to have a hearing. She's been asked that twice by Senator Holscher, and she says no. And the last thing I'll mention is early childhood. I'm very involved in those issues at the legislative level, and I chair Early Childhood Caucus that offers 4 forums during the session for other legislators. I look forward to talking about other issues as you ask questions. Thank you.
It's yours now.
Thank you, Senator Pettey. My name is Rui Xu. I represent House District 25. So that is 47th Street to 73rd if you're in Mission Hill, 67th if you're in Prairie Village. State line to Lamar is east-west. Like Senator Pettey said, we also did the flat tax. None of us voted for it up here. Just real quick, I don't believe that the flat tax is good policy for several reasons. Number one is that it sounds nice, but I study economics in college, and income has diminishing marginal utility, right? And so, the first dollar that you earn is going to go towards food. The $100th that you earn is going to go towards rent, right? The $500,000th that you own is probably sitting in an account somewhere. So that's why I believe that progressivity in an income tax system is good. I would personally support another income tax bracket, but that's another question. I don't get to vote on that. The second thing is that we have a really large surplus right now. I think $2.5 or $3 billion, somewhere in there. But while the governor has done a good job of shepherding that, a lot of that money is due to either, number one, federal money that came in during COVID that we've just kind of been holding on to, trying to figure out the right thing to do with that, so one-time money, or two, it's just kind of coming from additional sales tax receipts from inflation, right? If things are priced higher, we also get more in sales tax receipts due to that, and it's temporary. And so I don't want to be making really huge income tax policy like we did during the Brownback years on the backs of kind of this temporary surplus that's not kind of a sustainable system. And so the flat tax just by itself, that part of the piece is about $350 million a year. With no other changes, the flat tax bill that we just voted on is going to bankrupt us by 2029, so not very much time. The governor's tax plan is much, much, much smaller in fiscal note, more broad-based. It helps out more people, and it's just a little bit more sustainable. 1 minute already? Goes that quick? One thing that I will touch on that I think might be relevant to a lot of people in this room, or two things. Number one is I'm on the ranking Democrat on House Financial Institutions and Pensions. There's been a lot of talk about KPERS 3. If you entered the KPERS system post-2015, you're probably in KPERS 3. It's pretty good for people who are in KPERS for a short amount of time. It's really bad for people who are there for 25 or 30 years compared to KPERS 2. So we're going to be looking at fixes and adjustments to KPERS 3 to make it more adequate for the long term. We want our teachers to be there 25, 30 years. We want our state employees to be there a long time. The last thing I'll touch on real brief quickly, if anybody here has Asian American friends. So around the country, there have been a variety of bills introduced that are aimed at getting rid of foreign adversary ownership of ag land. They've been written in really broad ways around the country. The first version introduced in Kansas actually prevented any immigrant from these countries, China, Iran, Russia, et cetera, from owning any land in the state, which is obviously ridiculous. It sounds like there's a lot of interest right now in the legislature to expand that, not just to ag land, but to like commercial real estate renting, or like maybe even residential. So they're really trying to broaden that definition. So again, if you have Asian Americans who you know who would be really interested in this issue, have them reach out to me. I'm sure there's going to be a bill hearing on that soon. So I'll get done with my very fast 3 minutes and throw it over to Representative Clayton.
All right, let me know when I'm ready. All right, hi everyone. I'm Representative Stephanie Clayton. I represent the areas between 83rd and 103rd, Metcalf to State Line for the most part, unless you're between Mission Road and State Line. It's 95th to Somerset. So I am on 3 major committees. Those are the Federal and State Affairs Committee, the Commerce Committee, and the Tax Committee. Don't need to be redundant. Rui pretty much covered the way that I feel about tax. My voting record matched his. I support a lot of the things in that plan, just not the flat tax part because it's not sustainable. It's bad for the budget. We had a couple of hearings in federal and state affairs that were very, controversial. It's the way that the committee goes. And so one of them had to do with a constitutional amendment, sort of lessening some of the restrictions and enforcements on certain types of firearms and ammunition, and something that will surprise no one. I do not support it. I think one of the main issues is that you don't have a lot of controls over armor-piercing bullets, and I think that that's part of the reasons why I'm hopeful that that constitutional amendment will be dead on arrival. I think that a lot of legislators, we might disagree on a lot of things, but I think that we all agree that murdering law enforcement is bad, and we do not want that to happen. So, obviously. Also in the Commerce Committee, we had a joint committee between the Welfare Reform Committee and the Commerce Committee. We had this national fellow come up and speak to us about why it was wrong to fund school lunches for kids and why Medicaid is bad. And, it was, quite eye-opening. I really want to commend the members of the Welfare Reform Committee for some of the things that they have to listen to. Although as a member of the Commerce Committee, we tend to follow things like business and workforce issues. So I was somewhat bewildered as to why my committee needed to be involved in this ridiculous farce. And then I kind of realized after doing a little bit of Googling that this organization also is famous for pushing changes to child labor laws nationally. And so some of you might have seen some changes to child labor laws, in particular in Iowa, and so I had already prepared this anyway. But since this is the League of Women Voters, I do want to let you all know that I introduced a little constitutional amendment of my own to lower the voting age to 16 in Kansas. So, what was interesting is that it made some people big mad on the social media because they were like, well, these kids can't do that, and I'm like, that's really funny because I introduced a bill that would raise the marriage age to 18. They seem to be fine with girls getting married at 16, just not voting. So that's a big concern of mine. Obviously, if we are going to change child labor laws, we want to make sure that these kids do not have taxation without representation. And I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm out. Did I come in under time? Yes. Okay.
Yes, we have a starter thing here. Good, okay. I'm Representative Jerry Stogstall. I represent the 21st District, and that runs basically from 67th Street to 83rd Street, and then from State Line to a couple blocks past Metcalf. So welcome to the 21st District. We're all very glad to have you here this morning. And this is my 4th session, and I serve on as ranking Democrat on the House Education Committee, and also on the House Legislative Modernization Committee. And I also serve on the Tax Committee, and so I have a variety of different interests and responsibilities up there. On the Modernization Committee, we are trying to get it so that we are as modernized as we can be in 2023, and I can assure you we're almost all the way up to 1897 right now. So we still have a ways to go, but we are starting to address some issues like cybersecurity and so on, and also talking about some rules that we have to deal with in the House. And I think especially bundling bills. That is an awful way to do legislation, and we're having that discussion anyway. I'm not terribly optimistic that it's going to be changed under this leadership in the House and the Senate, but it's at least to start the discussion. Water Committee has been when I was appointed to that one, I thought, I don't know about water, you know, and it might be the most important subject we have to deal with in Kansas. And we've made some good progress in there, I think, over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, something happened in water that also has to do with process. And we had spent the entire session that year working on a water plan that was 421 pages long. It was not a perfect plan, but it was a good start. We had a representative that came in on the last day, did what they call a gut and go, inserted a 4-page water plan on behalf of the Kansas Farm Bureau that basically said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of this, trust us. And so that's the bill they passed. The chair of the Water Committee was absolutely devastated, and that representative ran for re-election that year, got re-elected, resigned, and became president of the Farm Bureau. So that's kind of some of the things we have to deal with in process up there. But anyway, I'm going to stop before I'm getting very nervous about this red sign here. So she has a lot of power down here, let me tell you. And I'll be happy to stand for questions when you have some. Thank you.
And I don't have any questions yet. Hold them up. Oh, I got questions. Okay. Whew. Okay. So first of all, in my intro, I forgot to mention, we invite all legislators in Johnson County or who have constituents in Johnson County to participate in these. So if you see someone missing, feel free to reach out to them. I already have, but sometimes that little boost helps. Okay. And then our first question. Please discuss any bills that would affect voting procedures, such as Senate Bill 366 or Senate Bill 368, absentee voting, and ranked choice voting.
I don't think any of us up here are actually on the elections committee, so I'm going to do my best. So obviously over the last couple of years, we've seen a variety of bills introduced to kind of reduce voter access, which I know is really near and dear to this cause. I think it's pretty safe to say, I don't really love speaking for everybody, but I think I can speak for everybody, is that we all support more people voting. And so we would obviously not support reducing advanced ballots. They're really trying to cut down on the waiting period or the receiving period for advanced ballots. You know, the chair of Fed and State on the Senate side is particularly into the conspiracy theories. So I know they're going to push it back on it pretty hard. But the truth is that advanced ballots, while important here in Johnson County, are really important in rural Kansas. Both it's a longer drive to get to your polling place in those areas, but also it takes more time for mail to get delivered. And so that's why having the 3-day grace period is really important in rural Kansas. So hopefully, you know, it's probably one of those bills that'll probably get through the process the first time around and they're unable to sustain or override a veto like the last couple of years, but we'll see. Ranked choice voting is something that I would personally be interested in. I don't see much kind of momentum in the legislature for that. Quite frankly, right now they have supermajorities and their incentives have been reinforced by the current system, and so they don't really have an incentive to change it. But on the Democratic side, I will say in 2022 we had a ranked choice primary. I believe, or 2020, we had a ranked choice primary for the presidential election, and it worked really, really well. People loved it. And so I had a couple of Republicans come up to me after we did that on the Democratic side and saying, how'd that work for you? So they're open to the idea, you know, personally, maybe for like a presidential primary or something like that. Maybe not this time around. There's not that many choices at this point. But I think some of them are intellectually curious, but I don't see much changing.
The one thing I was asked is that this is also an example of if you have a county that does something to encourage voting, then we're going to, and we have legislators that don't like it, then we're going to go after you. And that would be the case for Johnson County, sending out, pre-filled applications and information about voting. And so there is legislation to go after that election commissioners or the clerks cannot do that kind of thing. So it's just another example of, hey, we want more people to vote, we want people to be engaged and know about it, but we don't want them to be.
I just want to say one thing. I've been talking to people in Topeka about how Kansas can join this compact to get rid of the Electoral College. Everybody's vote ought to count. And under this system with the Electoral College, your vote cannot count in certain instances. So I have no expectations that it will get through this Republican leadership. But I think we ought to have that discussion, and I am bringing that up with people up there. And hopefully, if we can break their supermajority next year, maybe we can actually do something about that. But in my opinion, the two biggest threats to our democracy are the Electoral College and Citizens United. And we need to get rid of both of those things.
I guess the only thing that I could add here is that as House Minority Whip, we have the numbers to sustain any veto on any attempt to eliminate that 3-day grace period. So it was weird. I was talking with someone this morning that told me I wasn't going to sustain any vetoes, and like, excuse you. Yeah, so we will be just fine. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And, and also just keep watching, even though a lot of these bills won't get hearings. You've got a lot of good people that are introducing good election bills. You will be able to see more of those if you vote accordingly in November.
I have a lot of questions now. The governor vetoed 4 bills concerning transgender issues. We need safeguards for our children and safeguards for our women in athletics. How can you defend her vetoes?
All right, I'll take that one again. I think, again, we do have, it kind of depends on if these bills will come up again this session. So the veto regarding the trans women playing sports, that one did get overridden. Try not to think about that. That was a terrible bill, and anyone who opposed it is definitely on the right side of history. I do think, though, that you won't really see any of the other anti-trans bills coming up this session because public sentiment is on the right side of history in that regard, and those would be dangerous votes for vulnerable Republicans, but amazing votes for us. But I find it doubtful that those will come up, but if they do, I believe that we have the numbers to sustain those vetoes.
We are in a library. What are your thoughts on the banning book bans sponsored by Senator Holscher?
Wait, banning book bans? I didn't. Oh, is this the one where people have to read the book first? Oh, yeah. That's amazing. Also, there's a banned book that I've never read before. My son is reading it in school. It's called The Giver. I've never read it, so I'll read it with him. So maybe I should tweet it. It would be fun. But anyway, yeah, I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, we've also had a discussion this year. They wanted to, I know that there's a movement across the country to ban a book called Ruby Bridges. And this is about one of the bravest little girls you'd ever read about that helped desegregate the school system in Louisiana. In my opinion, every child ought to be reading that book and seeing what she did, what she accomplished, and it's a beautiful book. And to think that anybody would want to ban that book is just beyond my comprehension.
This is not like a sexy answer, but I haven't read the bill actually, and so oftentimes even well-intentioned bills can have larger ramifications. And so I would love to talk to any of the librarians or anybody here who does have thoughts on that bill.
I'll just follow up since it's about books because I said on Ways and Means, and we have subcommittees, and we just worked on my subcommittee, the state library budget, and it was so depressing for me because the state library is trying, you have our libraries, within our counties have a taxing authority. If you look at your bill, you see that you're helping to support your libraries in Johnson County. You have fabulous libraries. They offer lots of opportunities for everyone to be able to have free services, to come here, to get books, to get, information, education, help with their taxes, all sorts of things. So the state library is trying to reinstate something that was taken away. I'll have to say the word brown backslash. It's taken away about almost 2 decades ago of support coming from the state level for our local libraries. And so the ask was for $3,000 per library around the state. And then the second ask was, right now our libraries are getting like 28 cents per capita to help with the support of services at your library. And there's also, and then they're also within that is for the regional libraries as well. And that was, the ask there was to raise that to 67 cents because it hadn't been raised for, as I said, 17 years. So that came to about a little over $2 million. It would be an annual increase appropriation. You just heard about our budget, that we almost have a $3 billion healthy revenue. And my subcommittee, it was like, oh my gosh, they're asking for this big increase. This is unbelievable. How can they be asking for this much more money? So we approved $1,000 per library and raised that 28 cents to 30 cents. Now, on the House side, I just heard they even did worse. So I'm just using that as an example that, unfortunately, our libraries, which provide so much access to information for everyone, from birth, to 105, that some people look at those as in a different way. So I would say, talk about your libraries.
Can you expand on the status of the proposed school vouchers and how that will impact public education?
My favorite subject. I don't think we're going to hear, I could be wrong, but I don't think we're going to hear a whole lot about vouchers this year. There'll be some, I'm sure that they'll want to talk about, but I don't think they have any real appetite for doing that because that is a very unpopular subject with the people in Kansas. And it's especially harmful out in the western part of the state. I spoke in front of the House last year and I said, I just want to talk to my Republican friends across the aisle here who represent the 63 counties that don't have a single public or private school in those counties. And I said, when you have a forum, talk to your constituents, invite me out. I'll come. I don't care if you're on the Colorado border, because I want to hear you explain to your constituents why you're taking money away from maybe their one public school and sending it to private schools in my district. And you can tell when people are listening at the well out there when you're speaking, and I could see a lot of those rural Republicans going, oh yeah, that's not a very good idea. So I don't think that they will try it, although I think that the chair of the K-12 Budget Committee would just love to have nothing but vouchers in the state of Kansas. And but I think she's hopefully losing some support even over on the Republican side on this issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that they'll come up this year. Most likely, anything can happen. I think there are different policy pieces that we probably could and should look at as well. In a previous legislative session, we passed open enrollment for public schools, and that has a lot of unintended consequences, or maybe intended consequences, I don't know, for our public school districts. And so, I'd be okay getting rid of that, or at least fixing it so it makes it a little bit more workable for our public schools.
We just had at the Capitol a rally for school choice, and both leaderships in both the House and the Senate spoke at that rally. So that tells you a little bit about where the leadership is. As to the open enrollment, I agree. Our schools are going. That's going to be put in place this coming school term. So all school districts have put in place their guidelines based on the legislation. And as they've looked at the legislation, it's just raised a whole bunch of questions about unintended consequences. I mean, I'm not for open enrollments at all, but unintended consequences with the legislation we passed. So I'm in Senate Education. There was a bill that, actually we're going to have I think we're going to have a hearing on this next week, that makes one change to the open enrollment bill that already has not been used yet, and that's to allow students that are already going to school in a school district, like a teacher's children that may have already been going to Shawnee Mission, but they don't live in Shawnee Mission, to be able to stay in that school district. So that's just one of the consequences that, as these pieces of legislation are prepared, that can put in place. But overall, that piece of legislation is going to cause a lot of issues.
I don't like vouchers.
What one or two things will have to change to get Medicaid expansion approved? And this is a two-parter. What are the benefits of Medicaid expansion?
Vote, vote, vote in the upcoming elections in 24. That will make a big change, and I personally am counting on Johnson County, especially with some additional seats, to see a change in the Senate. House members can talk about the House side, but to see a change in the Senate. And I do believe that already my colleagues are feeling that pressure as well. So we can make a change at the election box, and that's the most important thing. I hate to say it, but a lot of this is, hey, we're not going to let the Governor Laura Kelly, have this win of Medicaid expansion no matter what. And that continues to be the feeling. So, as I said earlier, my chair of Public Health and Welfare has adamantly already said she's not going to have a hearing. Now, she might not have the final voice on that, but it does mean it's very, very hard to move ahead. But please keep up your work of putting pressure on us to make that happen.
Yeah, this subject irks me more than anything else. This isn't about license plates or things like this. This is about life and death. And we had a major presentation given to the Democratic caucus this last week on Medicaid expansion. And one of the questions I asked the presenter was, I remember in 2017, we saw a report that said 750 Kansans would die unnecessarily if we didn't pass Medicaid expansion. And that's, you know, that Medicaid expansion would cover about 150,000 people. So to think 750 of them would die is very reasonable. Matter of fact, I think it's a little bit low, more than likely. And she said, well, it's between 750 and 1,250. Now, if it's only 750 people, that means 6,000 people, 6,000 Kansans will have died under our watch because we haven't passed Medicaid expansion. If it's 1,250, that means 10,000 Kansans have died unnecessarily because they couldn't get proper health care. That's unacceptable. And I thought it was kind of interesting this year that the Speaker Pro Tem put out a notice and said he wanted us to be very civil this year, and he didn't want to hear anything about one phrase in particular was blood on your hands. Well, I'm sorry if the shoe fits. So anyway, that's my thing on Medicaid expansion.
You know, we once had a colleague that had a censure committee meeting for using the phrase "if the shoe fits," so hopefully no one heard that and got triggered, Jerry. But in any case, obviously strong supporter of Medicaid expansion, and I'll speak to things in the House. So Senator Pettey mentioned that, you know, definitely there are possibilities of picking up pro-Medicaid expansion candidates in the Senate. I do believe that we will see some pro-Medicaid expansion candidates both holding their seats and picking up their seats in the House as well. Because League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and because I'm just about as bipartisan as they come, I served 3 terms in the Kansas Legislature as a Republican. I'm finishing up my 3rd term serving as a Democrat. I will say this, that as a consistently pro-Medicaid expansion legislator throughout my career, moderate Republicans, especially in western Kansas and in rural Kansas, are key to Medicaid expansion. And so it is also worth noting that there are areas where, regardless of how we feel with whatever party we belong to, we need to be strategic about this. And so I believe that moderate Republicans holding and winning seats in rural areas of Kansas where, I wish, as a Democrat, I wish that it could all be blue. It's Kansas. That is not realistic. And so I think that it would be very valuable if you support Medicaid expansion, adopt a mod, and especially a seat there, and bolster them, give them a little bit of courage. They tend to vote a little bit more strategically because they have to worry about primaries, right? And so, but you're the League of Women Voters. You know a great deal about voter turnout and strategy. So if you want the policy done, it is a sort of a two-front war. First, you win moderate Republican seats in the primary, then you take out conservatives with Democrats in the general. That's how you get it done. That's how we get our numbers sooner, and that's what I would suggest.
I'll just add one thing. Stephanie's right on, but there's three things that have always been thrown out. One, the cost. Now there's no cost to the state if Medicaid expansion is passed. In fact, the money that would come in the feds would cover the cost of the state costs for the next 15 years. Two, that, hey, this is just letting those people who don't want to work get insurance. Well, the governor included in this plan that you have to be working. So that's removed. So those two things, the cost and that you have to be working, or that you that there's just lazy people, are all taken away. Those things are taken away. So as you're trying to talk to someone about this, use those facts that are out there to diffuse that conversation, because the legislation keeps getting tweaked to actually meet those kinds of things. And there's really, and the third thing is that there are 40 states that have passed Medicaid expansion. If you look at the map of the United States, they're all over. The South is continuing more and more. We're surrounded. All the states surrounding us have passed Medicaid expansion. So many of the arguments have been debunked. We have lost over $7 billion that would come to Kansas to help with health care.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on what Senator Pettey had to say. The three states right now that are seriously considering expanding Medicaid are Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama.
Kentucky just passed
it. And here we sit. We would be one of 7 states then. And as she said, last year, and it's still in effect this year, they offered those 10 states that hadn't passed it a bonus of almost $500 million, which would have covered our expenses for years into the future. So the thing that it's too expensive is absolutely ridiculous. And I have had a conversation with several of the rural Republicans on the other side of the aisle, and they've told me privately, they won't say it publicly, but they've told me privately, they're going to get us killed on this Medicaid expansion thing. We need Medicaid expansion out there in the rural parts of the states. That's where most of the hospitals are in danger of closing. If our little town loses its hospital, we're done. So I'm hoping that, I told them, I said, all that takes is this. Take your finger, push your button, go up to the well, and say what you should be saying. You know that. I said, the disconnect is this has to be connected to a backbone. Talk to your people.
How does the water bill impact Johnson County?
Well, it's, as I said, I think we're doing some good things in the Water Committee, especially under the new chairman that we have in charge of it. We did a modification of the water bill last year, and the governor is putting more money into that plan. We just had 2 meetings this week on it. One of them was about water. The other was on dam inspection, and which is a pretty scary thing in Kansas. There's thousands of dams that need inspecting, and we just don't have the resources to do that kind of inspection statewide. We need more resources on that. But I think the thing that I've brought up time and again in Water Committee is that most of our focus has been on like the aquifer out in western Kansas, which is extremely important. We rely on surface water here, mostly in the east. And I had to remind them that although I'm very sympathetic with the agricultural needs of Kansans out in the western part of the state, we kind of like to drink the stuff here. So I got them to come down and tour Water One, the facility over in Wyandotte County, 2 years ago, and I think they were super impressed by the amount of technology that goes into keeping our water safe and clean and good to drink. So I think that that's one of the things that we're really looking at as far as benefiting Johnson County is keeping our technology up to date so that we can be assured that the water that we do have that's coming out of our taps is safe to drink and clean. And that's going to be an issue across the state. So that's pretty much what we're doing for Johnson County right now.
Yeah, and just to put a little bit of a finer point on what Jerry said, so the water bill's main two aims are water quantity and water quality, right? Water quantity, obviously an issue out in western Kansas with the aquifer. That benefits Johnson County because we eat food, and then so as long as western Kansas is able to be sustainable and keep making food, that benefits all of us here. Water quality, Water One is wonderful, but they have their issues too. We have harmful algae blooms all over the place, and so the funding from that water bill can go towards addressing water quality issues as well, which makes the water that we drink safer and better.
Then we did address some of this, but I want to put a finer point. It's another question on water, in case anybody has anything to add. Water conservation. Assuming no bundling with unrelated legislation, what are some achievable legislative actions that could protect our water reserves?
Well, one of the things we're doing is we've established actually working groundwater management districts across the state. And we have put them in charge, and we've given them money to really work with the agricultural industry out in western Kansas to look at all kinds of new ways of conserving water. That includes new ways of planting crops, new types of crops to plant out in western Kansas. And the good news is that with this snow and with the rain, from talking to my colleagues out in western Kansas, the farm ponds and the surface water and so on is much better than it was, say, a year ago. To refill that aquifer would take decades. And so our best hope for that is to look at agricultural methods that we're using out in different parts of the state. And I'm trying to get them to work more closely with Kansas State University on those kinds of issues because we have a great resource there and I don't think we use it enough. But we are trying to address conservation issues and also agricultural issues that have a tremendous impact on water usage out in the western part of our state.
I think one of the biggest things that we could do is find a sustainable funding source for water. We tried to do that last year with the sales tax carve-off, so just like 1/8 of every cent or whatever of every piece of sales tax dollar that we get goes to water funding. That's something that we can do. Missouri, if you're aware, has a sales tax carve-off for conservation in general. And so just being able to find a consistent source that can help fund, $50 million or so in water projects would be really, really huge. Just for kind of context, over the last 10 years or so, the water office has been getting an appropriation of about $8 million, and we haven't funded the full $8 million every single year. And so just being able to put extra money into these water projects will go a really long way. And so just really finding a sustainable source, right? If you're relying on SGF, which is just the state general fund, that changes every year, right? It's just whatever the vibes of the legislature that year, right? But if you're saying, hey, this certain percent will always go towards water, that makes a big difference for planning for our water people.
The Department of Defense seems of the opinion that the USDA needs to do a better job of reporting foreign-owned agriculture land. How should Kansas insert itself in this, if at all?
In my opinion, not at all. The state does not really have an ability to determine who is and who is not a foreign adversary, right? That is clearly in the federal purview. But the state will do what it can. And so my goal this whole time is just, I know the numbers, and then basically the Kansas Legislature ends up being run in a shadow way by what right-wing talk radio is saying. And so this is their issue for the year. Last year it was ESG. And so something is going to have to get done. If something has to get done, what's the best strategy to get the least harmful thing done for me? And so for me, it's just to create the most narrow version possible. So an example would be, obviously, if a person is a legal resident of the state, for me, obviously, they should be able to buy or own any land that they want, right? If they are not a permanent resident and they are a government official of Russia, probably not, you know? And so just being able to really narrowly tailor it is the key for me, outside of us being able to like individually say this person is a government agent, this person is not a government agent. My fear is, and in my experience is that many of these bills are being written by the Attorney General, Chris Kobach, and he tends to paint with a broad brush, and that's literally the nicest way I can say that. And so the job is to just kind of fight against that and just really, really focus this on like actual security issues rather than just saying like, hey, immigrants can't buy a house or whatever.
Can you discuss interest in House Bill 2268 prohibiting certain restrictions of residential solar energy devices? Is any legislation protecting homeowners' rights to install solar generation on their property likely to be enacted?
None of us are on the Energy Committee specifically, so I don't know. I know broadly that I get a lot of interest in this. I represent part of Mission Hills, and I think in like Mission Hills ordinance, they don't allow solar panels. I think there is broad interest in doing something like that. I think my experience is that Evergy does not like residential solar, and there is actually a genuine like infrastructure issue, right? Because right now, all of our grids to our houses, if you don't have solar, is literally like we receive energy. If we do enact residential solar, ideally, we are able to receive energy and give energy back into the grid. And so I understand there are costs involved in that. But I think that is a problem that we can solve for. It's a problem that many other states have solved for and that we should solve for. But my inclination is that nothing will get done this session on it.
Okay, we have some gun law questions. Any movement possible to require safe storage of guns or other common sense gun reform?
Oh, no, we don't do that. So I have served on the Federal and State Affairs Committee for 10 of my 12 years in the legislature, and unfortunately, we just do not see movement on any sort of sensible gun legislation. We usually see movement on the gun legislation that would be the opposite of sensual. It's definitely not sensual. Banning books here. But in any case, so what I would recommend is like, let's refer to what we said previously, which is go vote and support those candidates. And I think that safe storage is, really one of the more, kind of really common sense, almost boring gun laws, right? But still, it's very difficult to get a hearing on that because you have so much pushback. Part of the problem is that the legislators who ask to be on the Federal and State Affairs Committee, I was first placed on that committee as a punishment because it is very controversial. Anyone who asks to be on it is really one of those red meat, I love guns, they usually get stacked for guns and babies, so to speak, and that's terminology that's used by Republican leadership, not mine. So, but still, so you really have difficulty of getting those things out of committee. Doesn't mean that it's not possible. I would love to see a hearing for that in the Health Committee, but we also have problematic chairing there as well. So again, see previous statement, go vote.
Yeah, I don't think that issue. I don't think that constitutional amendment is going to go far this year. I talked to the chair of that committee, and I said, "Are you going to work that bill?" And he said, "Not for a long time." And one of the people that I've worked with over on the other side of the aisle on this issue is Representative Mike Dodson from Manhattan. And Mike is the former commanding general at Fort Riley. And he knows a little bit something about guns. And he thinks our laws in Kansas are just insane. And I was a weapons officer in the Navy, and I can tell you right now, there's no civilian that should have access to a 50 caliber sniper rifle, which you can go out to Shields Sporting Goods and buy today. Just plunk your credit card down. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and there are those in the legislature that just say guns everywhere. And this bill would actually have addressed making it legal in Kansas for things like bump stocks and silencers, and those things are already banned at the federal level. So I think there's just too many problems with this amendment that it's going to go anywhere, hopefully.
I'll just add that that amendment was also, has been introduced on the Senate side. In fact, a colleague of mine was getting signatures on, and it was interesting. The people that were, the senators that were lining up to sign on for the introduction of that bill, and you know, it's like, hey, why wouldn't you want all these things included in the constitutional amendment? So, I don't know. I think it might get a hearing on the Senate side.
And just to give you guys a little bit of context, I know just like the amendment is probably not all that helpful. So basically what this constitutional amendment does is it affirms that the right to bear arms in the Kansas Constitution is a fundamental right. If you recall from the abortion amendment last year, a fundamental right means the courts view it, interpret it using strict scrutiny. And so for the state to infringe upon that right, you have to show like a really, really strong evidence that it's in the best interest of the state to do so. And so it just really, really, really tightens and strengthens gun protections. And so it would make it really hard to pass any gun control laws, gun safety laws.
So we have a follow-up question about vouchers. When public school scores continue to plummet, why do we continue to pour money into the system with failing results? Wouldn't vouchers make public schools more accountable and improve achievement?
Well, you know, state assessments are just one piece of when we look at what's going on in our public schools. They're not the end all. And we have seen a decline in the state assessments following COVID, and the reality is you just have to think about your own life, how you were impacted by COVID, or your family, or or anybody around you, and it did have, and it will continue to show up in our school system, because as a friend of mine said to me last year, that with kindergartners, it was like, she felt like it was, and this is a person that comes into schools and provides programs. It was like dealing with feral cats, because they hadn't been in a group atmosphere. They hadn't learned how to socialize and work with other children. And that's just not true for our kindergartners, our preschoolers, but it's true all throughout the system. And you can talk to any student and ask them if they felt like they lost something during that time, and it has an impact. So our state assessments are very important, and our state assessments are rigorous in Kansas. So when they're used as a tool to compare with, say, Florida or other states that do not have rigorous state assessments, that's another thing to consider when you look at that. So I encourage people, when they use that as a issue, that they look at the whole picture. I visit schools in my district every year, and I am thoroughly impressed about the dedication and the quality of teaching that's going on. I was a public school educator myself for 36 years, so I strongly believe in public education. Realize that if you talk about vouchers and you talk about using funding that should be going for public education, we're focusing then on a minority group of students and not looking at the whole picture for a whole state. And I'm interested in having the best education for all children in the state of Kansas.
You know, I would like to bring something up regarding testing, as Senator Pettey spoke of this. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that, you know, when I was a little girl, long time ago, growing up in Kansas, the testing that I took was the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. And I would imagine that many of you, I see your heads nodding. So that was the level of testing that was being used. You don't really see anyone using that as a main metric now. Now, as Senator Pettey mentioned, we have very rigorous testing. Well, what better way to declare public schools unsuitable for public funds than by making the tests more and more and more rigorous? If you change the metric, then of course you can declare anything broken. You know, we've heard the phrase, I did hear this in school as well, liars and statistics, right? So one thing I would like to see is that, frankly, I think that all legislators should take some of these very tests that we cite. You know, I will tell you that, you know, I have some concerns about how I might score. I was really good at geometry, great at basic math, not so much at algebra. So, but I think that until you have the policymakers taking these same tests by which we live and die by our funding, then we really have no room to talk. I would gladly take that challenge. I don't know if a lot of my colleagues would. And, you know, Stogsdill would probably beat me by a country mile at a lot of the evaluations as well. So, but thank you.
Two things real quick. Number one is that when you're comparing the two, there's a selection bias, right? Private schools can, by definition, pick and choose who they admit into their schools, whereas public schools, by definition, have to take everybody. And so if you're comparing the same test over the two different populations, they're never going to match, and there's a reason why. Number two, if you're looking at kind of a fairness or whatever, if you look at the data from other states that have expanded voucher programs, something like 85% of all voucher monies go to people who are already in private schools. And so this is not gonna like magically like go out and then go help out those inner city kids who are able to then go to private schools and all of a sudden like get themselves up by their bootstraps, right? In practice, it just ends up being another tax break for the people who can already afford to put their kids in private schools.
Yeah, I spent 4 excruciatingly agonizing days on the Education Interim Committee in September and October, and the last day of the Interim Committee was the week before the new test scores were coming out from the Department of Education. And talking to the head of the Department of Education, he said, our test scores are going up. And so I asked that we postpone the second 2 days of that meeting until after those new test scores were going to be available. No, 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 no. We want to be able to talk about the test scores in COVID and that sort of thing. So it was completely skewed towards demonizing our public schools. And the I pointed out in Education Committee already this year when we had this, we had a post-audit report, and I said, you know, they were talking about testing kids at the high school level and all the problems that they were going to have, which was way overstated. And I said, if you want to really address problems at the senior high level, have more elementary school counselors and social workers. Nip it in the bud. My wife was head of counseling at Shawnee Mission East for 14 years, and she totally agrees with that. She said, if we want to get rid of a lot of problems in our secondary schools, focus on our elementary schools. And that seems to be one of the first things they've always cut in Kansas when there's a reduction in money for schools. Counselors, social workers at the elementary level are some of the first to go. We absolutely have to reverse that.
Actually, we have 2 minutes. Can I ask one more question?
I'm just going to add early childhood education. If we, as the governor has put more money into that, you know, birth to 5, 80% of brain growth occurs between 0 and 5.
So I'm going to give you 1 minute or less. How can we best support you to represent our views as your constituents? And then there's another pair. You can pick one or the other. Does it help if we email the chair of the committees, like Representative Smith on tax in the House, or the House and Senate leaders, in addition to our reps and senators, about issues we're concerned about?
You know, I used to say that it didn't help if you emailed the chairs of committees, but I literally have spent time with the chair of federal and state affairs and with some of my colleagues on that committee, and they really do read the emails. For years, I used to not give them credit, and I was wrong. So I would say yes, please email them.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I get this question a lot. It's like, hey, like, you're pretty like-minded with me, you know, like me emailing you doesn't actually do anything. And so, yes, I do encourage you to just email and then try to start a dialogue with members that are on the committee, specifically the chairs. Again, they might not always read them, but sometimes they do, and sometimes they'll email back, and that kind of opens up another lane to just chat with them about it.
And it never hurts to add the "I'm your constituent" and your address so that they actually know you are their constituent. Like I said earlier, I keep up the mass Medicaid expansion that doesn't have any addresses on it. It does have emails, so I don't know if the people are in Kansas or not in Kansas. But of course, in that case, it's just you're flooding our inboxes, and that gets frustrating, but hey, they're getting frustrated about one thing, Medicaid expansion. That's okay. But yeah, when you write to your legislator, or if you send them an email, include your address and say you'd like to hear back from them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And try to personalize it in some way. If I get 15 emails that are just form letters with the same exact wording, I don't know whether that's coming from 15 different people or one person representing an organization, that sort of thing. So try to make it, especially focus on your local elected officials, your senators, your representatives, and so on. And it doesn't hurt to send it out to the chairs who may be from different parts of the state and that sort of thing. But do try to make it personal, and do include your address because that really gives it some credibility, especially with your local senators and representatives.
Okay, we are at time. Thank you so much to our legislators for taking time on their Saturday morning to be here. And thank you to you for showing up on a Saturday morning and taking time out of your lives to participate in your community. Sunshine next week. Yeah. Well, hopefully there won't be sunshine, so more people show up to the next one. I just want to toss it out. I go to every single legislative coffee that happens in Johnson County. I learned something at all of them. There are different legislators on different committees. As we talked about, some of them aren't on the committees you had questions about. I encourage you to go, even if your legislator is not there. I encourage you to reach out to ones that you want to see participate. Also, the league, the next one is in Bonner Springs. Is the address online, or do I need to say it out loud? Online. So you can go to the league's website. The address is online if you're interested in that. The next one in Johnson County is at the Lenexa City Center branch on February 17th. And then also the league is having an informational session about the March presidential preference primary. And that is on February 3rd at the Shawnee Mission Unitarian Universalist Church, if you are interested in learning more about the presidential primary. Thank you. Oh, and thank you to Corinth. We take over their whole library. Thank you, Corinth library staff.